Hello and welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, your host. Thank you very much for inviting me into your home again this week. And as you can see, I am joined by guest Alexandra Stein, and that is actually Dr. Alexandra Stein. And she is actually an amazing woman who has published, she is a writer and educator, and I'm just going to read from her website here because it's kind of summarizes it so well, is a writer and educator specializing in the social psychology of ideological extremism. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, and other dangerous social relationships. And she is currently an honorary research fellow at London South Bank University and also taught at Birkbeck University of London. So welcome to the show, Alexandra.
Thanks, Chris. Good to be back.
Yes. We talked years ago, and boy, a lot of water's gone under the bridge since then. I've done a lot of education. You've done more work. Things have rolled forward. Scientology has been exposed as a group much more. Lots of other cults are more in the public awareness and sort of consciousness. These words, toxicity and narcissism and abusers and predators and all this stuff is kind of more in the public consciousness now. At least that's kind of how I see it. What's your take of how things stand right now in the public eye with coercive control and cults and this kind of stuff? Do you think people are more aware of it now?
Yeah, it's been kind of amazing, really, from my perspective. I mean, I don't know, over the last 5-6 years, having kind of toiled away in the slightly anonymous trenches, as many of my colleagues have also done, there's been this explosion of interest in media. And, I kind of put it down partly to Trump and people starting to talk about cults at that level, to the hashtag Me Too movement. That kind of brought out a lot of stuff, to NXIVM and all the publicity there was about that. And then I think also just a maturing of the field. So, for example, there's my kind of peer group of scholars who were first-generation cult members, like me and Yanya and Steve Hassan and others, who I'm sorry, I'm forgetting you, but Dan Shaw's another one.
Yeah.
But now what we're seeing is people who are born into cults starting to kind of, I like to think of it as we all stand on each other's shoulders as the scholarship progresses.
Yeah.
Like I feel like Lifton and Hannah Arendt and some, and Margaret Singer were people who were my shoulders that I got to stand on. So I think this second and third and multiple generation folks have now started really speaking out. And I think all those things have come together along with terrorism and all so forth. And then I think this fact that we're linking it now to coercive control, which in England now has this law, which maybe we'll talk about later.
Yeah.
So there's a different kind of language that I think helps people connect cults to coercive control, to other forms of control. So it's been a really interesting and busy time, and also just a lot of media about this. But I think quite a lot of the media is getting slightly better, slightly less voyeuristic in some cases, getting the experts on a little more often, and trying to make some connections a little more often. Obviously, we have a long way to go, but so it's been a really interesting time and kind of gratifying in a way to sort of feel heard finally.
Right.
Yeah.
I hear you. And I'm, of course, one of those second generation folks,
Exactly.
right? Born in and speaking out now. And you're absolutely right. I have, I featured a number of second gen folks on my channel, and you see them starting their own channels, writing their own books, doing their own media, and really getting the word out there that basically raising kids in an abusive, destructive, kind of fashion or environment is really not cool. It's really not okay anymore. And for most of history, it has been.
And the other thing is with the people who are born or raised in cults, though they still get shamed and blamed, it's harder to shame and blame that group. than it is someone like myself, who, how could I be so stupid? Why did I want to go and join a cult? And, all the kind of cliches that we constantly are battling.
Yeah.
But it is harder for people to do that with people, those born and raised, because, it really wasn't. You can't say it was their fault. They just had bad luck.
Exactly.
So it's been really important. It's been really, really important. And also, it just highlights the lack of safeguarding of children in these groups, and the institutionalization of that lack, which we see in all cults, more or less, that the parents don't have real say over how they're raising their kids.
That's right.
That's not a good thing.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It's interesting, and this might be a great time to sort of segue over to some of your ideas and the work that you've done, because you wrote, what was it, in 2016? You wrote Terror, Love, and Brainwashing?
With an updated edition last year, 2021.
Excellent, excellent, and I can't recommend that enough. We studied that material in my program, on coercive control, and that's why one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show is to actually talk about that, because you have some very insightful ideas and science, kind of stuff about how this works.
Right.
It's kind of sciencey, right? But it's really important stuff, because we're trying to answer the question: how is it that you can see parents, specifically, is what made me think of this, become absentee, neglectful, even abusive parents, because they join some cult, they join some group, they get onto an ideological or religious or some other kind of platform where they think somehow this supersedes or takes over their priorities or their thinking so much that their own children become neglected as a result. And of course, I immediately start thinking about this thing called attachment theory and your work with that. Could you explain, how that works or what that's about? How is it possible for people to get that messed up with their family relationships because of the influence of a group or a leader?
Well, I'll give it a try.
Yeah.
It's a little bit complicated, so I'll just try to
Sure.
Simplify it. So attachment theory, which is an evolutionary-based theory that was developed, probably starting in the 60s by John Bowlby. And it's amazing stuff, and it's quite well known in various ways now, but often not well explained, to be honest. But, if you go, anyway, it's great stuff. And it's based on the idea that people don't just need food, shelter, sex to survive and keep the species going. They also have a need for protection, particularly babies need to be protected by their parents or they wouldn't survive. So it's been selected in, this need for parents and babies to attach. But it kind of carries on through life. We need each other to survive, in short. There are various attachment statuses. I won't go into them all, but there's a kind of organized set that are, one is really good and the others are good enough. They're kind of predictable ways that people react and respond in personal relationships. But the attachment status that I'm particularly interested in, and that I thought really helps us understand the cultic bond, is called disorganized attachment.
Yeah.
And it's called that because what happens is you perceive, let's say, a person, but it could be a group, but for the sake of the discussion, I'll say it's a person, say your parent, as being a safe haven. They're the ones who are supposed to comfort you. And so we have attachment behaviors when we're stressed or tired or sick or frightened. And those states trigger us to try to attach to our comfort figure, our safe haven, which if it's in a reasonable attachment relationship, that's okay. You get some comfort, or even if you don't, you kind of know that's what's going to happen. But in a disorganized relationship, it's actually the so-called attachment figure, the so-called comfort figure, who's creating the stress by being frightening. So you have perceived comfort and fear from the same source.
Right.
Whereas when you have a kind of, let's say, secure attachment, you'll have a comfort over here and the person over here, and the fear is external, or it might be in the person being ill, but it's not coming from the comfort figure.
Right.
But when the fear comes from the comfort figure, so in other words, let's say an abusive partner, an abusive parent, who sometimes is saying, I love you, you're the best thing, in the world, here's a bunch of flowers, but then turns on a dime and is threatening and frightening in a variety of ways. So that creates what we call disorganized attachment. But it doesn't really create as serious a problem if you're not isolated. So if your comfort figure is being frightening and you have other people in your life, you can kind of go to them, other trusted, safe people, I should say. You can go to them and say, my mom's freaking me out, and you go to Auntie Jane and she says, yeah, well, your mom gets like that sometimes. Let me give you some tea and cake. I'm in England, so I have to say tea, not coffee.
That's right.
So you can kind of escape that if you have other trusted people in your life, but the abusers cut you off from other trusted people.
Yeah.
So you're kind of trapped in this little box. And I'm going to show you my picture from my book, because I chose it because I want to show all these people trapped, isolated in these boxes. I mean, they're sort of together, they're shoved together, but they're not really together, they're isolated. Because isolation is really the principal element of this dynamic.
Yeah.
So you have this supposed comfort figure who is actually frightening. You've got the victim, let's say, isolated. So their instinct, their evolved response to threat is to seek their comfort figure. So they go towards the source of threat, who is also supposedly the comfort figure, because they have nowhere else to go. And that going towards the source of threat is a very dangerous thing, because obviously we shouldn't go towards a fearful stimulus. We should flee or fight it. So instead of the fight or flight response, we have what we call fright without solution, or freezing, because it's maladaptive. It doesn't help us survive. And the best way in that situation for us to survive is to freeze, which isn't a very good survival technique, but it's the best we can do.
That's right.
So it's the same as if someone's in any kind of trauma, there's this kind of freezing that happens. But in a relationship or a cult, that can go on for years. So it's not a momentary trauma. It's what I call a chronic relational trauma. And you get stuck in this positive feedback loop of trying to get comfort where none is available. Well, they might sometimes drip a little tiny bit of comfort just to keep you hooked.
Yep.
But mostly you're going towards the supposed comfort, but getting more fear, getting your cortisols, which are our hormonal response to stress, activated. So you're in a constant anxiety state like this, bonding to this supposed comfort figure to try to get resolution, but not ever getting resolution. Whereas in a secure relationship, if you're frightened and you go to them for comfort, they'll give you comfort, and eventually you'll have enough comfort. And we say in that case, your attachment behaviors are terminated. So you can say, oh, thanks, that was really nice to get that hug and be soothed. I'm off now to have some more fun. So you leave again to go and get more stimulus. But in that trauma relationship, you don't ever get that. You don't ever attain sufficient resolution of those high cortisols. So you stay in this permanent anxiety.
There we go. And that's
So,
why there's
yeah.
a physical component to this. It's not just spiritual abuse or psychic abuse. It's actual, there's physical
Mhm.
stuff going on there that over time can physically wear down your systems.
Totally. I really do think it's helpful to see it as a physiological process
Yeah.
about inducing stress. And then what happens to stress, what happens to the brain when it's chronically stressed. And in this situation that we call fright without solution.
Right.
So you're chronically in this hyper-vigilant, hyper-anxious state. Now, importantly, you don't know why.
Yes.
Okay, if you were, if I don't know what an example would be, if I'm worried about getting COVID, let's say, which I tend to be, and I'm going, especially in that first year, right? You're going around, we were all chronically worried, weren't we, and frightened.
Yep.
But we kind of knew why. It didn't mean it was nice or easy, but we knew what the problem was. In a cult or an abusive relationship, you don't know that the story, the narrative that the abuser is delivering says, this is heaven on earth. If you just work harder, you're going to attain transformation. You're going to be successful at business. You're going to have marvelous relationships. You're going to, in the case of the cult I was in, we're going to move towards a revolutionary society. You get this story that has nothing to do with what you're experiencing, which is this oppression and fear and general unhappiness. So you don't, and you can't unpick that. Like, I'm a critical thinker. What's the name of your podcast? Critical Thinker.
Yes, I used to identify as critical thinker at large.
Okay. Well, I was a critical thinker, and I mean, I wasn't necessarily right about. I mean, I was wrong. I was young and foolish about a lot of things, as one is. But I did think critically. I tried to understand the world, and I was a big reader and thinker, but cults disable that. It's not that you're not initially a critical thinker, but that constant tension and anxiety has an effect on the brain.
Yes.
Because you're in this trauma state, this kind of, basically you're frightened all the time without knowing it and without knowing why.
Right.
And in my kind of attempts to have a basic understanding of the neurobiology of trauma, and I'm by no means an expert, but I did try to learn about it. When one is in a state of trauma, the piece of the brain that links the sort of midbrain, the more emotion, unprocessed piece of the brain that's just responding to the world and its stimulus, there's a piece called the orbital frontal cortex. I think of it as being here. I don't know. It's sort of in the middle there. It connects to your frontal cortex, which is your language-based critical thinking, not just reactive part of the brain. Yeah. And that piece, the orbital frontal cortex, when there's some stimulus coming into your midbrain through your senses, its job is to say, do I need to think further about what's happening, what this stimulus is? And if I do, it links up, this is how I visualize it, to the frontal cortex, and you can then think clearly about it. Okay, COVID's rampant. We don't exactly know how it's passed, but I think I'm going to study what the epidemiologists say. I'm going to wear my mask. Yep. That's linking this kind of fear response to a critical thinking response. But when you're in trauma, that piece deactivates. So you're having all this fear stimulus, but the fright without solution means it doesn't get up to that cognitive, the higher order cognitive part of your brain. So you literally can't think about the frightening relationship.
There it is.
And again, I was a thinker. I am a thinker. I couldn't think about it.
Yep.
part of why you can't think about it is because it pushes you even further into the fear.
Right.
So there's this kind of, do you approach it? Do you avoid it? No, I'm just going to freeze. It's too, cannot compute.
Right.
So I think that, so you have the emotional bond that I described of trying to get comfort, and then you have the cognitive disabling of your critical mind about that relationship. So you maybe can still be critical, or not maybe critical. You can think about other things.
Yep.
Like your job maybe, or whatever, but you cannot think about what's happening in that relationship. It's a powerful dynamic.
Big time.
Really powerful. Yeah.
Well,
I think that's my short version.
Yeah, no, that is beautiful. And I am so happy that you were able to break it down that way with the brain science as well, because I have said for years, I've been telling people, look, when it comes to a cult, when it comes to an extremist belief set, you are incapable of thinking critically about it. I've said those exact words. And you have just broken down exactly why, right? At least from one, from a brain science and an emotional response and, sort of neurological point of view. And that is exactly, what I've been preaching for years and it's hard for people to kind of get their wits around it, because it's like you have this very smart, very sensible person who has, put together a decent life, raises their kids, does whatever they're doing. But then they get into this area, or they join a cult, or they get, involved with some narcissistic individual, and suddenly everything is just insane in their life. And suddenly they are acting completely nuts. And nobody can really understand why. And you've just kind of basically broken it down.
I mean, what I would love for any young scholars listening, I really think that, a neuroscience lab could see this.
Yep.
I mean, there was, I think the Bessel van der Kolk book, which I'm going to forget the name of now, The Body Keeps the Score, has an old study in it. And there are much newer studies that say much the same thing. But the study that he talked about, which first kind of got my interest in some of this element, was with Vietnam vets reading back, like they were under the fMRI machines to look at their brain activity, and they either had read back to them their narratives about some trauma from Vietnam. And in that case, their language region of the brain didn't light up, which is called the Broca's region. But that's all part of this general region. There are all these pieces that live very close together in the brain that are all linked to this, language, judgment, executive function. And I'm sure that if we put some ex-cult members under, in one of these marvelous machines and had them think about some of the traumatic episodes in their lives, we would see this effect. I mean, we kind of have to, because it was traumatic, so why wouldn't we? Absolutely. And we know that cult members suffer trauma. So it's not actually rocket science. It's just putting the dots together,
Exactly. Well, you're really basically describing a situation of complex PTSD. Because
that's exactly, right? Yeah.
Because that's the thing. It's the recurring trauma, and it's complex because it's not just based on a single incident, or a single thing. It's an ongoing series of traumas, and this is where we get into. Would you like to connect this, or can you connect this at all with this concept of trauma bonding? Because I kind of think you've also described that here too.
Yes, and by the way, also I just want to give a nod to Judith Herman, whose book Trauma and Recovery is absolutely brilliant, and really talks about a lot of this stuff, in slightly different terms, but she really gets this very well. But I think I tried to talk about trauma bonding really already, that because you have to, again, it's biological, it's physiological. You're in a state of stress, and biologically, we try to seek comfort. And if the only comfort figure is Guru, what's his name, that's where you're going to go.
That's right. And
unless you've been previously taught or have learned about these dynamics, in which case you have some protection, because you go, oh, I understand what's happening. I'm going to have to look after myself here for a while until I can escape.
Exactly.
But most people have never been taught this stuff. So they're just like leading lambs to the slaughter, you know.
That's right. Well, it's because when you're in that position, and this is, again, I'm so glad you're bringing up these points, because this is that educational component that is so important for ex-cult members to get their, that you got to get your head around these concepts, because otherwise it's a big mystery. It's a big question mark in people's minds. Why am I drawn to this person I know is bad for me, and yet I cannot help but can stay in their orbit, or keep going back to them, or they go into this sort of apathetic state of, I guess there's just no getting out of this, or there's no hope for me, and they tend to put the blame on, the onus for, the responsibility for this on themselves. And they don't recognize that there's a bigger situation going on here in the dynamics of the relationship itself, and the fact that there is a reward system and a punishment system, and over time there's less reward and more punishment, but it never really does go full 100% punishment, because you always got to keep the person on the tenterhooks. You got to keep them around, and that's where the candy, the flowers, and the rewards and all of that come in. And it's just this, it's frightening how sheep-like, I guess you could say, we can be about that when we don't understand the situation we're in.
Mm-hmm. Judith Herman has a wonderful phrase in her book about the candy and the flowers, that little drip drip of keeping you in.
Yeah.
She says she calls it the capricious granting of small indulgences.
Beautiful. Exactly.
But basically you're being exploited 24/7.
That's right.
And told who to sleep with or not to sleep with, and et cetera, et cetera. Right. The thing that you were saying, an interesting piece about why people find it hard to detach if they don't understand the process, is there's a phenomenon in attachment behaviors that's, again, a normal part of human attachment behavior. An attachment relationship, as I describe it in my book, courtesy of John Bowlby, is that you can experience great distress on the loss of the relationship. And the other feature is that only that relationship will do. It's not replaceable by any other. Right. So let's say it's your parent. That would be a kind of more normal relationship to have those feelings towards. Now, if, say, a parent dies or a loved one dies, we tend to engage in what's called searching behavior. That's what attachment theorists call it, because you have this bond and you're distressed. And in fact, it's part of being disorganized. So when you have a bereavement, attachment theorists think that there is about a year, I mean, I'm sure that's not a definite amount, I'm sure sometimes it's longer or shorter, where that relationship is disorganized because you love that person, but now they're gone. Could be true also of breaking up a very close relationship, right? Mm-hmm. You love that person, now they're gone. So you're experiencing those contradictory emotions. You want to go, the loved person is causing you distress by their absence.
Right.
But you're trying to go to them for comfort.
Right.
That they're not there anymore. So when you lose someone, you have this period where like recently, my sister sadly died, and I kept seeing people with long blonde hair on the street. I knew she was dead. I wasn't confused about that, but I would keep doing these double takes, right, thinking, oh, that's Hattie. I think that was searching behavior. Like I hadn't metabolized, even though I knew she was dead, I hadn't really metabolized that, is a word they use in attachment theory.
Interesting.
So in a cult, even if you leave, you may still, when you feel stressed, you're still kind of primed to go to them, and that, or like a breakup of a relationship that maybe you even broke up, but you kind of want to go back to them when you're stressed. So that's called searching behavior. And I think that happens quite a lot with ex-cult members. And it's very confusing. And it's helpful to know that it has a name and it will dissipate over time.
Exactly. But the pain of it initially, especially, I will say, I'll just throw out there the first year, is so bad that causes a lot of recidivism. You get a lot of people going back because they can't deal with that vacuum of emotion or that feeling of need that is unfulfilled, and it's got to get fulfilled, and that's where that emotional needs component comes in.
And I mean, I know for me, I hated the actual cult. I had no desire to go back. I was just so ready to escape. But I think maybe a little way I had it was trying to, so I was in a political cult, as I think you know, was trying rather quickly to get involved in other political activity. And it was like, no. After a few tries, I was like, oh, no, I can't do this now. This is way too complicated. I didn't know what I believed anymore. I didn't know how to be in a group. I hardly knew how to be with other human beings, So with ex-cult members, you do have to go through a process of really re-establishing, or for second and multiple generation, establishing more normal life, and that's what's so difficult. There's so many aspects of life. It's not just one, it's really a tough journey.
I'll certainly back that up. I mean, it's coming up on 10 years out for me. And
Mazel tov.
Yeah, thank you. And this end of this year will be 10 years that I'll be out of the Sea Org, and next year it'll be 10 years out of Scientology altogether. And I can tell you it's a process. It's a slow process in some ways, even when you are like nose to the grindstone, like I've been, and you're really working on the recovery and you're really working on trying to figure it all out. It takes time. And it's really only been very recently that I have really felt at all confident in the idea of joining a group again.
Right. That's the last thing. And when you do, listen, I work for a charity, the Family Survival Trust. We're a wonderful bunch. But, as other people will attest, it's hard to organize a group of ex-cult members. None of us want to be told what to do.
Yeah, it's really weird. It's an odd phenomenon that way. Exactly. We're a little...
I really need my autonomy.
Exactly. It's a funny dynamic, though, working with people that way. And it has a lot to do with all this attachment stuff, which is why I love hearing and having all this broken down and explained. Because it's not that, and I'd like to be clear and maybe ask you about this, because it's not like these are abnormalities in our psychology. I don't look at these as aberrations or as aberrant behavior or as like something bizarre and inexplicable that only a minority of the population suffers from. We all need attachment. We all need to connect with people.
In fact, it's something wrong with you if you don't need that.
Exactly.
I used to talk to a lot of these terrorism scholars, and they would say, things like, well, these people who join ISIS have a need to belong. And I would just laugh at them and say, well, we all need to belong. What a ridiculous thing to say.
Exactly.
They're not all like that, but a while ago, that was the response I used to get.
Right.
But it's normal, it's adaptive. If we didn't need to belong, we would not survive.
That's right.
The abnormality is in the perpetrators who have a need to control others.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And as I never remember who said this, but as somebody said, who have great insight into the minds of others, but not into their own minds. So they know how to manipulate in order to control others. And I hypothesize, and there seems to be pretty good evidence, come from unhappy childhoods. More than that, frightening childhoods. Doesn't mean that everyone from that kind of background is going to turn into a cult leader, but cult leaders do have these, I think, frightening backgrounds that lead them to feel the way they can feel safe is to utterly control other human beings.
Yes.
And they can't let any reciprocity really enter into the relationship.
That's right.
And everything is about them. You can see that with Mr. Trump, frankly, with Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
Bless. It's a very predictable set of characteristics that I think Janja Lalich has described well in her book, Take Back Your Life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the models have been upside down. They keep looking for what's wrong with the people who join.
Yep.
Well, there's nothing wrong with us. We were just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
That's right.
But there is, and also we come from a great variety of personalities, a great variety of pre-existing attachment statuses. Some of us had screwed up attachment with our families. Some of us had perfectly secure attachments. That is not the predictor. The predictor is, did we run into a cult that didn't tell us what it was, but claimed to be something positive that fit where we were at that point in life?
That's right.
So, I always say, for me, I was a political animal from a young age. I wanted to be in a political group. And I had been in some okay political things before, but because the vulnerability factor of I had never been taught anything about what a cult is, I knew nothing about cults, that when I got into this thing that then started clamping down, being very secret, telling me my good points were actually bad points, et cetera, controlling my personal relationships, telling me who I should marry, and working me so hard. I mean, that's the other thing, is the physical exhaustion.
That's right.
So it adds to that. I mean, there are many, the attachment piece that I've described is, I think, the core thing that disorganizes us and makes us unable to think. But there are many other things that add to that keep that going.
That's right.
Like the physical exhaustion. I think what Steve Hassan talks about, isolation from information, and all his bite model.
Yeah. Sleep deprivation.
The secrecy, sometimes malnutrition, the rewards and punishment. All these things act together. So it's not, my thing is one piece, but we have to look at, there are many pieces to the puzzle to create a person who cannot think clearly.
That's right.
So again, when I got out of the cult, having worked 18-hour days for God knows how long, many years, and I often tell the story. And I remember saying to my sister after I got out, I don't know why I'm so tired. I'm having 3 naps a day. And she just looked at me and says, well, you're tired. I had a lot of sleeping to catch up on. And I was physically just totally drained. So, so all these things work together to disable us from being able to think and being able to escape also, which is another element. The actual escape can be very difficult.
Well, because
for many reasons.
Exactly. But this uncertainty, this confusion that we ourselves will generate when we're stuck in a situation like that and don't understand all the components of it, again, we'll tend to introvert. We will tend to blame ourselves. And we are assisted in this by the fact that the narcissist, cult leader, group are telling us it's our fault if we're having doubts, fears, uncertainties, reservations, right? Because it's like, all that social pressure, even if it's just from one person or, again, from the group, it becomes even more powerful. And then, of course, the love bombing just is more triggering of the traumatic bonding. And so it really, the forces arrayed against you can be quite powerful, and lacking any understanding of that, it makes complete sense why somebody would stay stuck in that situation for an ungodly amount of time before they finally snap out of it and get out. And that escape factor is very, very difficult because you have to overcome all of that to get out.
And you have no validation when you're in the group. All the validation is this fictitious story about how great the group is. And I mean, the reason I got out was because at one point the leader was in jail, unbeknownst to me. And one of the women I knew and was friendly with, as much as one can be friendly in a cult, which is difficult, had finally said, she thought there were power problems in the group. And I had this momentary validation And I just burst into tears. And within 3 months, about, several of us were out.
There you go.
Because when you don't have any validation, that's why cults have to immediately get rid of people who are causing trouble.
Yep.
They can't tolerate any dissent, because that can spread like wildfire, because it validates not just the ideas that people have, but their lived experience, their actual experience of this dreadful life they're living, because mostly it's dreadful. There may be some good things, but generally it's dreadful. That's why we don't like cults. If they were good, there wouldn't be a problem. We wouldn't be talking about it here.
That's right.
But they're not. They're crap.
That's right.
So as soon as you get a little validation, that also helps you start to be able to, because in a way, the validation gives you a kind of safe haven that kind of can let that, even if it's just for a moment, let that freeze response, that fright without solution response, oh, maybe there's a solution. Maybe I can talk to this person about what the problems are.
Yep.
Or think it through. Or maybe you read something, maybe you're one of these people who's gone on the internet against the orders and read a critical account, and you go, oh, there's that validation allows you to break that fright without solution problem. So, all this stuff that all of us are doing right now, of all this media, is really important, because, I've had some clients doing recovery work with me, I think at least 3 or 4, who've come because they watched Wild Wild Country, which I'm not sure is the greatest explanation of cults in the world. I haven't actually seen it, to be honest, but they watched it and went, oh, I think I'm in a cult, right? Mm-hmm. So once you start to see your experience reflected and maybe have a language for it, you can find it makes sense. That starts to make sense of your experience, which the fictitious narrative doesn't. That just confuses you. Exactly. Which helps the dissociation and the disorganization.
That's right. Which is the reason why these groups and cult leaders will specialize in developing thought-stopping cliches, right? The thought-terminating cliches, because they want you not thinking. And as much as possible, they're trying to tamp that down, right? And keep it so that you're just thinking with the mantras and the and the purpose of the group, and you just stay focused on saving the world, or whatever it is the group is supposed to be so centralized around.
The whole thing about language in these groups is absolutely fascinating, and I have one chapter on it and on the ideology, and at the time I thought this should be a whole book, but someone else is going to have to write it, because it won't be me. But you can just look at a snippet of like the leaders' language. Like once you know what they're doing, you can just see it in a paragraph. It's so fascinating, because it's language that is geared to dissociating you.
That's right.
So it's either, like the guy I studied for my PhD dissertation, Fred Newman, and his cult, he would write these half-page long paragraphs with like 6 parenthesized clauses dumped into the center. You could not, no matter how hard you tried, you couldn't make sense of what he had written. But it had all these big words, and it seemed very sensible. You just were like, I think I'm too stupid to understand it.
Yes.
Or you get the Trumpian language, which is just overly simple and repetitive and equally not understandable, other than just hectoring.
That's right.
So it's really fascinating. And its purpose is not to make sense. In fact, the opposite. Its purpose is to be nonsense, to be confusing to the brain, but to appear as if there's something there. If only you could just figure it out.
That's right. Because the mystery of that is what it acts like a glue that just keeps you stuck to it, because you keep thinking, I'm deficient for not understanding this, because you've granted authority to this figure for whatever reason. And so now you have to understand them, and it's your deficiency that you don't. It's never the case. And and I can relate so well to what you're saying, only because That's L. Ron Hubbard as well.
Yeah.
I mean, to a T. I couldn't believe my master's thesis was research on Hubbard's language and how it
Oh,
develops
good, good.
a coercive control framework. And I analyzed 5 of his lectures.
Oh, great, great.
Yeah, it was an amazing exercise because I saw things in his work that I had never seen before, even so many years out. And
Wow,
and
wow.
really breaking down how he did what he did with the language. And it's all there, all the coercive control elements. But you come to realize, like you were just saying, it's not about words that are communicating clear-cut ideas. It is about words that are used to incite emotional responses,
Mhm.
and build a framework of double binds and the bounded choices, right? And the screwed up attachments. The words reinforce those. And it's this really bizarre use of language that people don't think about because they don't use language that way. Cult leaders do. You
And
know?
that, sorry, carry on.
No, I
Yeah.
was just gonna say, I mean, you get a shade of this with politicians. You get a shade of this in music even a little bit, but it's not destructive.
Mhm,
Cult leaders
mhm,
turn it to the dark side, you know.
mhm. And just to build on that, so what I was talking about that key relationship of the fear and comfort from the same figure.
Yeah.
Often people think I'm talking about a direct relationship to someone. But for instance, I didn't know my cult leader. I didn't know his name. I didn't know what he looked like. He had an acronym, which was POO at one point, which
Hmm.
is interesting acronym to
Pooh.
choose. At another point, I never knew what it even stood for. Another time it was PS, Program Secretary.
Hmm.
Anyway, I didn't know this guy. I didn't know there was a guy, you know. So you don't have to have that direct relationship because the whole point about cults is that they institutionalize these dynamics.
Yeah.
And one of the ways they do it is through language. And again, I think this is where Yanya's work is really interesting through bounded choice. So that what she calls the transcendental belief system or the ideology,
Mm-hmm.
and this the control and the norms, the systems of control and the social norms. I can't quite remember how she discusses it.
Mm-hmm.
But you have this whole, it just kind of comes through the structure, the isolating structure of the group, the weird language that supports that structure, then the comfort, fear dynamics that run all the way through all of this.
Yeah.
And that's really fascinating. And, that's really important to understand because we have these, cults like North Korea or ISIS or Hitler's cult, they're not, doesn't have to be a direct personal thing. It's a system. But that system, I think, all goes back to the leader's brain and the leader's need for control and their disorganization and the only way they know how to relate to other people. But then they kind of create these systems, not consciously, but they learn that this is what works. If you do this, and also that's probably how they grew up. So they learned it in their background. A lot of them, as we know, like Scientology is a good example, went through other cults first and picked up some tricks there because your guy was Crowley and all that.
That's right. That's right. All through 19th
Theosophy,
century and that's right.
Theosophy and Madame Blavatsky. I mean, she must have spawned many thousands of cults.
Yes.
But people pick up the tricks, and then Scientology has spawned many more. But they have to have at the top a person who has that psychology of needing to control others.
That's right. I think you've just helped describe as well the online cult model because we have this thing now. We have Teal Swan. I don't know if you've heard of her or, some of these people who are just online personalities and through video work and then through seminars and in-person work. Teal Swan does, in-person stuff. But that's where you get the real inner circle hardcore membership. But you do get this online component. And I think we saw this most strongly around QAnon. which is still going.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and nobody knows who Q is. There's all kinds of suppositions. So your point about that direct relationship is really important. I ran into David.
But someone is directing
That's right.
QAnon. It's not an organic thing that just came out of nowhere.
That's right. That's right.
And they know what they're doing.
Yep.
By the way.
I completely agree with that. I don't think you can accidentally form a cult.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it requires intent. And clearly there is intent there. But the online model is really interesting because it doesn't have that brick and mortar physical component always connected with it. And yet all the mental and psychological stuff happens. And you're like, how is this possible? Exactly what you've been describing. You know, just because you're not physically in touch with somebody doesn't mean they can't do these things to you.
Also, and I mean, I don't, you know, I'm still trying to understand the online element, but I think a lot of the online cults also do have personal relationships. I don't mean direct to the leader, but they're networks of personal relationships. So, you know, your sister texts you, look at this website. And because she's your sister, you give that
That's right.
validation. You trust her. Or your friend. You know, that's how the multi-level marketing stuff works, right?
That's right.
So you do have these known networks that kind of spread the stuff through your personal connections who you have some form of trust in.
That's right.
And then some of them, and I don't know about QAnon, but something like Free Domain Radio with that dreadful guy, Stefan Molyneux, who's just a fascist.
Yes.
You know, that was like mostly online, but then people, and also for that matter, the recruitment of many terrorists online.
That's right.
But you end up maybe having a more personal relationship with the recruiter. You know, maybe the recruiter becomes known to you as someone who you're messaging a lot. So you develop a personal relationship. So it's not just out there. It's coming into your personal orbit. You're developing trusting relationships with the people.
That's right.
That makes sense. I think that still goes on a lot. I don't think it's just random on the internet. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
I think we have still quite a lot to understand about how that works.
Yes.
But as we know, especially in these days of COVID, we build strong relationships online. They're not, just because they're online doesn't mean they're not intense and personal and real.
Exactly.
You know, I know we talk about in real life, but it's also in real life, the online, you know. So there's just a lot of interesting things to think about
right.
that. And I'm sure there are people doing that right now. So that's great.
Exactly. I certainly hope so. I would go so far as to say for sure, I would say that you're not going to radicalize somebody without that personal touch.
Yeah, exactly. Because you have to form that attachment in a way. You know, they have to feel like they're part of something. Good God, that they belong.
That's right.
You know.
That's right. And you need that community sense of emotional, you know, comfort and fulfillment. And that only comes from another human being.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So interesting stuff.
Isn't it? Isn't it interesting stuff? It's, you know, and I can sense I remember so much of what you're talking about in my Scientology and Sea Org experience with David Miscavige, because I only interacted with the guy like 3 or 4 times for brief periods. And yet, you know, he was this model, ideal Scientology figure. And I didn't have to interact with him that many times for that, you know, sort of disorganized attachment thing to happen. And then it was just, you know, then it just gets reinforced through written works or through video, or you see him on a stage at an event or something. But all those emotions are at play every time you're encountering the person. You know, and I would call it respect when I was in the Sea Org, because I didn't know what word to assign to this mix of feelings that was love and terror combined. That really was. I mean, that's why I love the title of your book, because it's just perfect. You know, because it's these extreme emotions. It's the thing about cults. The thing about these extreme things is they are extreme. They're not middle of the road. When you're a middle of the road on something, you can think about it. It's when you go extreme that you start losing your ability to.
And that's something that's hard when you get out, I think, to kind of reconcile to being an ordinary person.
Yes.
You're not part of this elite that's going to save the world.
Right.
And you know, that's quite a come down. It kind of, I mean, it was very humbling for me. I hope in a good way, and improved my personality. I'm less arrogant than when I was young. But also Zimbardo and was it Anderson, was another author, wrote a really nice little paper about when keeping a balance of what they call saturation and detachment. So when you're getting involved in a group, so I used to teach this paper when I was teaching, you don't want to be so detached from life because you've been so scarred in a cult that you never want to do anything again.
Yes.
You want to get involved and be passionate even about something, but you also want to sometimes detach and sit back and review and evaluate.
That's right.
So they talked about it as being keeping a balance between saturation and detachment. And I thought, I like that. I like that way of talking about it, you know, because as you said, so many people just get so frightened and traumatized they never trust anyone again. But,
That's
you know,
right.
then you have a rather poor life experience, you know, that's.
Well, exactly. Because I was talking the other day on my live show about this fact, and it was kind of springing from exactly what we're talking about right now. Is, for a while now, I admitted I've been afraid to commit, because it would limit my choices. And I thought about it that way. But also there's that emotional part, right? Which is like, oh boy, well, when you commit, that means you're giving over a little bit of yourself to something. And you want to be careful about how much of yourself you're giving over, because it's so easy to slide all the way in because you get really excited. And there's that whole new relationship energy thing that happens when you're in a new relationship, in a new group. They can do no wrong. It's always just the good of the thing. And you really got to, it's a matter of having intelligent degrees of caution. Not don't take it too far, don't be paranoid, but careful what you choose to commit yourself to, you know?
And that's where learning, as we kind of started, learning about how cults work, learning some good social psychology,
Yep.
learning about boundaries, learning all of this stuff is really helpful, because once you can learn about it, then I always joke, I can spot a cult from 3 miles away now. I'm quite often seen to walk, like I walked out of a yoga class last year. I walk away from things with impunity. In the middle of someone's talk, I will say, warning sign, red flag, I'm out of here.
That's right.
And it's very empowering, because when I don't see the warning flags, then I'm like, okay, we're doing all right. This person isn't trying to control people. So that's something that is learnable. It's not magic. And that's really helpful. But it can take a while if you've been in a cult for a while.
Exactly. There's just a lot to overcome. But I think at least those of us who have seen behind the curtain and been part of that experience, I hope it gives us a leg up. But there, again, if you don't get educated, you can just fall for it all over again, and it's really, really, really important. Alexandra, I think I want to wrap up now. I think we have covered some amazingly important information, and I don't want to overload my audience, because this is really concentrated podcast of a lot of stuff we've covered here. Are there any other points that you think we haven't covered that are like super, super vital that you want to impart to an audience of ex-cultists or people who are looking to try to help people, friends and family who are in cults?
Well, just one thing in terms of kind of the direction of our activism is, some suggestions. I think one direction, which we've talked about at length, is education, both for ex-cult members and the population at large, as a prevention, both a recovery and a prevention measure. But I think the other thing that we need to be active about is legal sanctions on cults, which currently are very absent, if they're at all. And the thing we're trying to do in the UK right now with the charity I work with, the Family Survival Trust Action Against Cultic Abuse is our full name, is trying to amend the UK law on coercive control, which is a very good law, and it details patterns of behavior, which are exactly what cults do, that are now in a personal relationship illegal. If you do these patterns of coercive behavior in an intimate or family relationship, if you're successfully prosecuted, you go to jail. So we're lobbying to say, if that's illegal in a personal relationship, how come you can get away with it in a group or a non-domestic relationship?
Yes.
So what? That's just our particular.
We studied this law in my program.
Yeah. So you know how. Yeah. So I think for activists, that's just for the UK case that we have a law that we can fight to make better.
Yep.
I think we have to try to fight for some legal sanctions on these groups, as well as doing education. I think I see those as the two poles that need to happen.
I agree.
That's really my last comment is, encouraging people on that. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's vital. And you're hitting on something that I run into all the time in trying to, a very big pillar of frustration for me in the last 9 years has been watching Scientology, and to a lesser degree, other groups that I've paid some attention to, but not as much as Scientology for obvious reasons, watch them wrangle their way through court cases and succeed where they should be failing.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we don't have the laws. We need new and better laws, and it's achievable. Yes. We can do it.
Excellent. Yeah. I agree completely. Well, Alexandra, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Welcome. Yeah, it was good to chat.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Okay. And folks out there now, let me wrap up with this real fast, and we'll wrap up. Where do people find you? Where do people find your work?
My website is www.alexandrastein.com, and my book is Terror, Love, and Brainwashing, and my earlier book is Inside Out, which is my memoir of my cult experience, so one of the many memoirs that are out there. I guess that's how. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I will put a link in the show notes below, folks, to her website, so you can check that out. And I cannot recommend enough. I'm serious, and I retweet Alexandra all the time. She's a really smart person, and she's got really intelligent things to say. And I really want you guys to read her book. So do check it out, okay? And that's as much promotion as I can do here on that. So again, thank you very much for being on the show. And folks out there, thank you very much for inviting us into your home this week and watching us talk about this. And I hope you learned something from it, and it was at least somewhat educational, informative, and entertaining. And on that note, if you would like to support the channel to keep this content going, please do so. Links below to all of the various ways you can show us some love. All right, guys, I will see you next week. Bye-bye.